Hi, I'm Charlene Jorgensen. Today on Quilting from the Heartland, I'm going to show you how to make pillows for special occasions like anniversaries and weddings. For the pattern shapes today, I've decided to use the miniature double wedding ring template set. This particular design is very appropriate to use for weddings because the interlocking circles represent the bond of marriage and also the rings that are exchanged during the wedding vows. The pillows that I'm going to be working with today look like this. I'm going to show you a couple of different ones. First of all, this one that happened to be used in the wedding is all white. The arcs are a white brocaded satin. The background is a satin, and then I have little birds in the center which are embroidered on the sewing machine using a satin embroidery thread. The connecting corners are also of a white satin fabric. Then on the center of the pillow, I decorated a little bit with a 1/4-inch ribbon, and then I tied on some fake rings so that it would look a little bit more decorated. The next one that I'm going to show you is different just simply because I put gold lame in the interlocking circles. It's very easy to change this pillow, making it appropriate for a golden anniversary or a silver anniversary by just simply changing the color of the arcs. And this particular one is for a golden anniversary. This one has ivory satin. I have hand quilted it with an ivory thread and then also finished off the outside edge with a ivory lace. The next thing that I'm going to show you is the runner that was used under my daughter's wedding unity candles. I put 3 circles in a row, and on the end, 2 end circles, we machine embroidered some doves again. And like I said before, this stitch is available on the sewing machine. It's not something that I did by hand. Well, let's get started now making the pillow for the ring bearer. The first thing that I want to talk about is the type of fabrics that we're going to use today. In all of the other programs, I use 100% cotton fabric, but today we're going to use lames, satins, and some brocaded fabrics. We will have to do a few things different when we work with them ahead of time so that they're a little bit easier to work with. This one happens to be the brocaded fabric that I'm working with, and then I have just the other fabrics in the order that I will be using them a little bit later on. The first thing that I have done to prepare for the pillow is I have cut a piece of satin the size that I need to cut all of the background, the melons, and the connecting corners from. And I just simply figured that out by placing the templates down on top of the satin, making sure that I would have room for all of them on that fabric. Then I ironed on the back of that fabric an iron-on stabilizer, and this would give me the ability to do the machine embroidery that I wanted to do at the sewing machine. It would stabilize the fabric so that I wouldn't end up with little puckers. And let me show you what happens if you don't put a stabilizer on. The birds in this particular design are supposed to be the same shape, but because I didn't use the stabilizer, they became a little bit uneven and it was hard to control the fabric. After you have put the stabilizer on and embroidered the birds on, then I simply tear away the stabilizer from the back side of those birds. That was there just for the purpose of doing the machine embroidery. So after you take that apart and you've decided that you still want to do some more embellishing on the front of the pillow, probably you want to put the bride and groom's name and the wedding date on, then I have ahead of time put on a piece of typing paper the names of the bride and groom and the date of the wedding. I did it in a bold ink so that I could see it through the satin fabric. Then I placed the birds that were machine embroidered on top of that satin fabric. I placed the birds, on top of the name and the date, and I just went over the top of those letters, and I hope that you can see them through there, but I just lightly went over the top of those letters with a pencil that's made especially for quilters. Then after you have got the name of the bride and groom and the date on, you're ready to do some hand embroidery on the middle of the pillow. When I have that part ready, I put it into a little frame, and this one happens to be 8 inches by 8 inches, making it easy for me to work with. I like it because I can control the tension of my work when I'm working on it. Also, I can get at all parts of this small project very easily when I turn it around. I'm going to use a gold metallic thread when I do the embroidery by hand, and you just simply do an overhand stitch, which we call the embroidery stitch. And like I said, this particular frame is very easy to work with because you can hold it in your hand so easily, and just pick a little bit of the fabric, about 1/8 of an inch of fabric, and then pull this the thread through and just repeat that motion until you have covered all of the letters that you want to embroider. You can put many different messages on there. Possibly it would be happy anniversary or whatever. But just put whatever the message is that you want to put on there. Then after you have completed that process, you just simply remove the clamps that are on the frame all the way around and place it down on the cutting table ready to cut out the shapes. We'll go back now to the piece of fabric that I have done the machine embroidery on, but I don't have the names on it. And I'm going to start cutting out the pieces that go into the center of the pillow. And for this, I like to use a small mat board because I want to be able to turn my work as I work around it. So place it up on a small cutting board and place your template down on top of there. Now it's hard to decide where the center of the birds or the template is, so ahead of time I made scores on the template so I could identify where that center was. And to find the center, I placed the template down on top of a ruler and laid it so that all of the lines were equal all the way around. And then I placed another ruler up on top of the center of it, and I just simply scored the center of the template in both directions with a stiletto. You could use any sharp object to do that and make that line going in both directions. And that's how I scored then the center of the template. I also use those score lines in some of my other patterns when I use the miniature double wedding ring set. Okay, so now let's put that template down on top of those birds, and I'll have no problem figuring out where the center is. And I'm going to use a small rotary cutter when I cut around the edge of this template. Just follow the edge of the template, and I'm slightly tilting the cutter as I work my way around it. It's a very simple project to work with. Notice that I have fabric grips on the back of the templates. That will keep it from sliding when I'm cutting around, especially on something like satin. You want to have something that will hold it in place. And if you don't turn your mat board when you're working, it would be very hard to make those nice cuts. There, that's how easy it is to cut out the center part of the miniature double wedding ring pillow. That's going to be the ring bear pillow. Then we have still left to cut the melons and the connecting corners. And we're going to use the white satin for those, and then also the connecting corners. Now the leftovers that we have are what we're going to use for the melons. And what I'm going to do to make it go a little bit faster, I'm just going to fracture it on all of these corners and layer all 4 of them on top of each other so that I can cut them all at one time. Then place this little melon up on top of there, and we'll be able to cut them now. And again, notice that I have the fabric grips on top of the template, and that will keep them from sliding. I don't think it would be possible to get it accurate without the grips, especially on a satin fabric. There, now we have the connecting corners, or excuse me, the melons cut for the whole top of that pillow. Then all we have left to cut now is for the connecting corners, which go out here. And you do the same process for that. Just lay the fabric on top of each other, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to fracture the leftovers and place them up on top of each other, and then place the connecting corner on top of those pieces of fabric. And I'm cutting them so that they're on the bias. This happens to be the selvage edge over here. I find that it's much easier to sew the connecting corners in if I have them cut on the bias. And again, I have fabric grips on the back of the template to keep it from sliding. There, we've already got those cut. I still need about, I guess, 4 more of those, but I won't take your time to cut all of those now. But that's how you would cut the connecting corners. Then we have to decide what color fabric we're going to use in the arcs. And like I said before, we're going to work with some lame today or some brocaded satin. Either one will work in the arcs. And let's pretend that we're going to use the lame fabric and talk about how you would prepare that fabric ahead of time. If I'm using the lame, you can't iron on the right side of it. It just doesn't work out. It would scorch it and make little bubbles. On the back side, though, I have ironed an iron-on interfacing so that it will make it easier to work with. And when you're working at the ironing board, you would have the interfacing with the sticky side facing up, and then you would have the lame on top of that. And on top of that, then the very last layer, just before the iron, you would have a pressing cloth. And I set the iron on a wool setting so that I don't hurt the lame fabric. That's all you have to do that's different when you're working with lame. And just remember that you don't want to touch it with the iron when you're working with it. Then if you're going to cut the arcs of it, I would cut several at one time, fold it into fourths, and lay the template down on top of it. And just like any other fabric, from here on you treat it the same. Just simply cut around the template, and you would then have gold arcs like this. If you're going to cut out of a brocaded fabric or something that has a pattern in it, you might want to select some of the larger flowers or something special in the design. And because you can see through the template, you can place that template where you want to on the fabric when you cut it out. So for this one, we're going to use the brocaded fabric. And again, just place your template down where you want it to go. And I'm going to cut off a piece of this because it wants to pull away from me. And I'm going to now be able to turn the board as I work. Okay, so now with a small rotary cutter, just simply work your way around the template until you have enough arcs for the whole top of the pillow. There, that's how simple it is to cut all of the pieces for the miniature double wedding ring design. Now, of course, if you are going to make the runner for the unity candle, you would need enough for 3 circles, but we're just going to be working with the pillow top, so we don't need to do that. Well, we're already ready to start sewing it together, and I have all the steps of construction right here at the table, so I won't be going to the sewing machine right away. And I'm going to show you how to put the pieces together as best I can. The first thing that you do is sew one of the arcs onto the melon. And when you attach those two pieces next to each other, sew with the arc on top and the melon on the bottom. And to find the center of the melon, I like to cut a little notch on both sides in the middle of each one. And that will mark the center on that. And I would do the same on the arc, or on the arc that you attach to it. I'd fold it in half and cut a little notch on both sides. Use a small scissor or rotary cutter or something, but be careful that you don't cut that notch too big. You could also mark it with a pin or something else. Then, like I said, with right sides together, you would pin first the center and then the outside edge, and you'll notice that there is a little bit of a tail on this end where you begin to sew, and that's where the 1/4 inch seam allowance is showing up. All of these pieces now must be sewn together with a scant 1/4 inch because you need to make up for the amount of fabric used up in the seam line. The next step that you would do would be to put the connecting corners on the other side over here. And like I said before, we have it on the bias, and that makes it a little bit easier to connect it on. And I'm going to turn both of these pieces over so that you can see the direction that I have ironed the pieces. This one is ironed towards the center, and both of these are also ironed towards the center on the end. Now it's time to put these two together, matching up the center. And when you put these two pieces together, it looks a little bit awkward because it seems like it would be impossible for the two pieces to fit when you place them together. But the first thing you would do would be to pin that very center part right here in the center, matching up those two notches that you made before. And then put a pin on the seam line 1/4 of an inch from the edge on the top part and then on the bottom part. Now I have sewn with blue thread on this white satin. Now you would never think of doing that. I just did that so that you could see where my sewing lines are. When you put that first pin in, leave it standing upright and then put another pin on each side of it. And that will hold that particular part, intersection in place. Now if you want to know exactly where to sew over, you might take a little marking pencil and mark that particular spot where the pin went inside so that you know where you want your needle to go in that intersection. Then go to the outside edge and, well, I guess first of all you'd pull that pin out and then put that pin on the outside edge. Now in between there you would move these two fabrics so that you have a nice match right in here and put one more pin. Now if you have to stretch one or the other of these to get them to match, your seam allowance has been inaccurate. And just repeat the same step on the other end, pinning it in the same way that I did this opposite end. And then in one continuous seam you would sew those two pieces together. And let's turn the next step over so you can see how it was done. This is the seam right here that we were talking about. In one seam, sew all of these together, matching up the corners out here, and then press that seam allowance towards the center. And we'll turn it over on the right side so you can see how those seams match up right here. Now it's time to put the background piece onto this particular arc. And what I have done with the background, first of all, is folded it in fourths to mark the center of each of those pieces, or each of the sides, excuse me. Fold it in half on each side and cut a little notch on each of the edges. And on the one that I'm sewing on here, you can see the little notches right here that have been cut. Place the melon and the background piece together with the background on the top of the melon. That's the order in which you work with them. Match up that center notch that you made first, and then put a pin on the outside edge. And this is a very important part of this design. You don't ever want to sew off this little part out here. That is to be left open. But put a pin on that intersection and match it up with the one underneath. The pin that you put on the top background part is done 1/4 of an inch from all of those, all three sides of that part of the design. So that is where you would pin, and that is where you would stop sewing. Now this is the first part of this design that you do any back stitching in. You would back up to this part of the arc and then go to the other end and again back up. And I want to say it over one more time that you do not sew through the end of this particular part of the design. That's where you stop sewing. You continue to add the melons around all the sides of the circle until you have 4 of them added on. After you have all 4 sides added on, then you have still got to put the seam on the connecting corner in, and that's the very last part that you do. And when you turn this particular piece over, it's easy to see where the sewing lines have gone. I'm going to lift this particular part of the design up so that you can see what happened underneath here. To put the connecting corners together, you start sewing from the outside edge, go into the center here, and then back up. And repeat that process on all 4 of the corners. That's how simple it is to make just the top of the double wedding ring ring bear pillow. Well, now I have some other steps that are all ready to show you finishing off the pillow. It's going to now have to be, we're going to add a batting, and for that I like to use a lightweight batting because I want a low loft in the top of the pillow. I don't want to have a real high loft, and this particular one is the one that I like to work with. Let me show you how light it is. See, it's just a real lightweight batting, but just enough to give me a little bit of height when I do the hand quilting. I have already got that step in progress, and when I put the 3 layers together to make the sandwich, what I did ahead of time was I put the back of the pillow down on a surface, and I used masking tape to fasten it on all 4 sides. Then after I had that attached to the tabletop, then I placed the batting down, and then I put the pillow on top of that, and I used a long running stitch around the outside of it to hold it in place. And then I could do some of the hand quilting that I wanted to do after that. And when I work on that, again, I like to work in a small frame. And I have the pieces cut just big enough so that it would fit the outside of the frame. And you want to work with a frame that fits the particular project that you're working on. And you just snap the edges on like this, and that will hold it in place while you're doing the hand quilting. Just snap them on, and you can adjust the tension by just simply going in and out. And then after you have all 4 of the sides on, we're ready to do the hand quilting. For the hand quilting, I have used a shiny thread because I figured with the satin fabric I wanted to have it look as shiny as possible, because I didn't think that just a cotton thread would look nice on it. And I quilted just 1/4 of an inch inside of the arc. To make the knot on the back of the quilt, or on the end of the thread that I'm going to quilt with, what I do is make a circle with the thread, and I hold on to both parts of the thread with this particular thumb over here. And I wrap the needle about 3 times, and then I pull the thread off of that needle, and it makes one nice knot. It doesn't end up to be a strange shape to it. And then when I'm going to quilt, just insert the needle, like I said, 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and I use a rocking motion with my hand. And I put the needle in, and I just rock that needle back and forth with my fingers and make long, or not long, even running stitches all the way around the outside edge. Now we are ready to attach a lace around the outside edge of this pillow. After you have the hand quilting done that you want, cut all of the batting and the back around the outside pillow off, and I have that next step all ready to go. I have already attached a lace on the outside edge of this pillow, and the lace is facing downward or right side to the pillow. If you look at the inside of this pillow, you see that this is the one of the ones that has the gold lame in it, and it's a little bit different than a couple of the others. I don't have any name or anything in it, and so it will end up to be one that I can use as a gift a little later on. Something else that I might mention is these make real nice keepsakes after an event is over. After you have the lace on, then put it right side down to the back of the pillow. And on the back of the pillow I have attached a ribbon, and that's for the little ring bearer's hands to go through. So just put it down and put a pin on all 4 sides and sew around the outside edge of it. And it will be stuffed with a batting when it's completed.